So Teresa, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's just so great. I love watching your videos and seeing your healing journey as well. It's really inspiring. And I think it's just so great to connect to other people. There's so many of us that are, struggling to find healing. And we're looking at all these alternative avenues. And yeah, I think it's great. And like you said, the rabbit holes you can go down, there's so many of them, but finding those common grounds and then getting to connect on it, there's so much meaning there.
Yeah, and you said that. So you are a coach, or
So I'm a
you're
licensed mental health therapist. So
like
I
okay,
yeah, I have my master's and my postmasters and all my clinical hours. So I'm licensed in 4 states. I do my full-time job is I run a group counseling practice, and we went fully virtual the last couple of years. So we have clients all over. But unfortunately, my journey is struggling with Lyme and POTS and chronic fatigue syndrome, Epstein-Barr, all of kind of that trifecta of things, histamine intolerance that so many of us, I think, are like, this is a mystery. The doctors are like, we don't know what to tell you. So you become your own doctor and you start going down those Google searches and Facebook groups and figuring things out. They actually had misdiagnosed me with MS and lupus for years of these mystery symptoms. And then they're like, but it just doesn't look right. Like there's something else. So I found some functional providers and got kind of the more extensive lab work done. Living in New England for 15 years, there was a lot of consideration of maybe Lyme, but Western medicine, they only really test for 2 or 3 specific types of Lyme. So many people are misdiagnosed. So then I found a independent lab that tested, and of course it comes up like 6 types of Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, and then the Epstein-Barr was off the charts. So it started to make more sense. And then searching for holistic things, I'm very much holistic in all of my practices. DNRS was popping up. And that's obviously one of the kind of initial brain retraining, limbic system retraining programs that's out there. So I kind of started my journey, took their program, went through it, found it really interesting, saw a lot of improvement. I wouldn't say like 100% improvement, but definitely the drastic improvement that I saw so quickly was enough to keep me going on this idea of like, yeah, this limbic system healing, there's really something to this that we're not addressing in any other field.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you went down the hole of doing DNRS,
Mhm.
and what were the results of that?
So,
This obviously must have made an impact on you, seeing how you became a coach for it.
yes.
So what happened when you started doing that?
Yeah. So, and I'm not a DNRS coach specifically. That's the program that I did. I just want to clarify because I think they
Right.
have their own like coaching system, and I
Yes.
don't want to I don't want to misrepresent
Yes.
myself
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
But um I started in September of 2020 doing DNRS because I was at just kind of a low point with my own healing journey and my energy in particular. And what I noticed almost immediately within the first 2 weeks of just doing that really positive self-talk, the visualizations, just committing to the shift in perspective, I felt my energy itself was just shifting, and my ability to see things in a positive light, to not be symptoms focused, to not feel bogged down by symptoms was really transformative. And one of the biggest changes I noticed is whether it was kind of like an MCAS or histamine response, all of these allergies and allergenic responses I was having to so many things um, almost went away entirely, or I could stop them in their tracks. So if I started to notice these allergic symptoms coming up, I was able to do some of these visualizations and to self-talk, talk to my limbic system basically out of fight or flight mode. And that was huge for me because mold sensitivities, allergies, histamine reactions had been one of my most troubling symptoms. I could barely eat anything anymore, right? I couldn't really go places because of these chemical smells and things like that. So that was huge and life changing. The energy shift a little bit. Like I said, it didn't get rid of every symptom I had, but those were pretty limiting symptoms. So that really got my motivation going to keep going with it.
Okay, that is something I really want to zero in on here because so many people on my channel every day it's about the histamine reactions, right? You're getting
Yes.
histamine reactions from food or
Mhm.
stress or any lack of sleep or any sort of stimuli, that could be set off your nervous system or whatever. So, okay, can you explain to me how it is, or okay, exactly what you did to calm down those histamine reactions? And how does that work? Like, how is it that just doing visualizations or something like that, how does that work in terms of reducing histamine?
Yeah. So I love the science part of it. I more touch on the emotional side. So I'm going to use some of the
Yeah.
sciencey terms, but probably not as well as some people would use them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, we know the amygdala is like the gateway to our limbic system, to that reptilian part of our brain that controls fight or flight, controls our gateway of what we consider a threat and what we consider to be safety. And the part where my theory comes in is I think we live in such a toxic world right now, where there are so many really unhealthy stimuli hitting us from all different levels. And if we pair that with a viral injury, a emotional trauma, a chronic pain trauma, anything that kind of wears us down over time, our amygdala is stuck in fight or flight mode for so long, it starts to perceive everything as a threat. Like that gateway is just stuck on high alert open all the time. And now almost anything that's coming in, we can perceive as a threat, even when it's not a threat. So that's kind of my understanding. I know there's more words we can use about kind of the HPA axis and how the hypothalamus and they all kind of interact. But I like to keep it simple with just how anyone can understand it, right?
To keep it simple, it's almost like we're stuck in this acute threat zone where we're being chased by bears all day long, pretty much. Right.
Exactly.
except
Exactly.
now we have different stressors in life. We have, we're at the office all day, or we have bad relationships, or we have some kind of trauma or something, or chronic illness or whatever, right? It's not, it doesn't line up with the sort of primitive idea as to what this is sort of designed for, whatever term you want to use for it.
Yeah,
Does that
I
make
like to use
sense?
exactly. And I have this analogy I use because I work with a lot of people with PTSD and trauma. And I think something like a histamine reaction, we can explore under that lens of how someone would react to trauma. And so I like to say, you or I or someone who doesn't have a trauma history, we hear a knock on the door and our initial reaction is like, oh, cool, I wonder who that is. Like, do they have a delivery for me? Is it flowers? Like, we might have a good, exciting feeling, or just kind of like, oh, curious, who is that? Someone with a trauma response, because their amygdala is stuck in overdrive, they hear that knock on the door and instantly it's a rush of adrenaline and their heart rate goes up and their breathing goes up and they're hypervigilant. They're in a panic attack. They might be ducking down or tensing up. Their thought is, oh my gosh, it's danger. And that explores how their whole body reacts to just this stimuli. The stimuli itself isn't inherently dangerous or positive, it's neutral stimuli, but their reaction because of their past trauma and how that shaped their limbic system shows how their body shows up and how their brain shows up. I think it's the same if you think about the histamine reaction. If you're a person who's been really lucky in your life without a lot of limbic system trauma, you can probably eat whatever you want. You can go into a moldy building. You can kind of be around EMFs or chemicals or fragrances or all these things that cause reactions for some people. They're not healthy, but they're somewhat neutral in small doses for most of us, right? But then if your amygdala is stuck in this on response and these other, you're already kind of looking for what's the danger to come next. You've had a lot of reactions, so you're hypervigilant, you're afraid to go out in the world, try a new food, go to a new place. That's where I think that overreaction comes in, because that cortisol response, that adrenaline response, just like with hypervigilance and PTSD, it can cause a panic attack. Of course, it can cause a histamine reaction.
Right. And I remember, I think it was Annie Hopper that said that they actually did MRI scans on people and showed them pictures, people who had mold sensitivity, showed them pictures of mold.
Yes.
And it was lighting up the fear center of their brain just from looking at a picture of it. There's
Yes,
no actual threat there, right?
Yes.
So that is part of that trauma loop that,
Yeah.
and of course, cortisol and these sort of these hormones that sort of cause this cascade of inflammatory cytokines and all this stuff. There's so many different things that it impairs in your body.
Yes.
That stop people from healing. Because I know, coming from my world, there's so many people I talk to that they've done every protocol, been to every expert, taken every supplement, every antibiotic, everything they could possibly do to heal, except this is the missing component, right? And when they start doing this, they're like, wow, something's actually working. Or once they start doing this for a few months, and then they go back on a protocol they tried before. It's like, wow, this protocol is actually working now, right?
Exactly.
Because you're calming your nervous system down. And there's so many things that it impairs when you have that limbic system injury from healing, right? So
It's so
it's
true.
very interesting.
Yeah, there's a book called Toxic, and I wish I could think of the author and the subheading of the title, but it talks about, our culture, multiple chemical sensitivities, mold illness. And I was reading through it and I was so amazed to see he mentioned specifically DNRS and Annie Hopper's program in there. And he, in his book, he does talk about these extensive protocols of using natural plus pharmaceutical ways of healing these illnesses. But he says exactly what you just said, where he's like, if you have not addressed the limbic system piece, none of this is going to work. And when I read that, I was like, I'm so glad that, a book like this, where and he is more on the holistic side, but he was talking about, his medical background and prescribing pharmaceuticals in addition to herbalism. So he's not all woo-woo, as some people would call the limbic system group. But even he was like, no, I've seen this work. Like there is drastic impact on, we need to calm the limbic response, which is like an inflammatory response, really, before we're going to see results from traditional medical models.
100%. I totally agree with that. So, getting away sort of from the sciencey side of that. So, what can you walk us through? Like, say in the beginning, you were having these histamine type responses. You started employing these different techniques around limbic system training exercises. Can you walk us through what that might have looked like for you, just from a layman's terms perspective?
For sure. So what I really like in that DNRS program, and there's also a book by Laz Evans. I don't know much about this author other than they had put out this wonderful ebook that's a free resource years ago called A Rational Approach to Healing ME, I believe it was called. And it just talks about using what they call the STOP method. I think they had taken a little bit from Phil Parker's lightning process too. It's really similar to DNRS. Sorry, my dogs are barking. It's really similar to DNRS, but it's a free resource. And so I always mention that because I know I don't want to like step on copyright toes and be like, here's my process and use DNRS's copyrighted part. But really it's about talking into your own limbic system and almost imagining. What I like to imagine was from Laz Evans' book, that it's like, remember The Simpsons and Homer Simpson's like up in that he's up in the nuclear reactor and he overlooks things, and there's that big danger mechanism next to him of like, if there's a meltdown, you kind of hit the alarm.
Yeah, push the lever.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in Laz Evans' book, she kind of references, I don't think she references The Simpsons, but in my head, that's where I went, is like, I'm Homer Simpson. And if something melts down, but in my case, it's like, no, it's stuck in the alert mode. There's always an alarm going off. So the mental process of when a symptom would come up or a trigger would occur and I get nervous about it is telling myself, talking directly to that control center, the amygdala, the little Homer Simpson, stop, calm down. Is this really a crisis? No, take that alarm and turn it from on and like turn it off for a second. Just like actually visualize turning that lever off to slow down that release of all of these neurochemicals to tell my system it's safe. And it's really just restoring sense of safety. But that internal talk, we feel like, what can words do? I'm talking to myself. That sounds crazy, but it's telling the limbic system, it's telling your body, like, it's okay. Like nothing really life-threatening is going on. Stop and calm down. And that was the biggest shift. And then from there, there's a lot of other scripted techniques you can put in there. But for me, the biggest thing I implemented was when those symptoms came up, saying stop. And then just focusing on, like, I don't have to go down that same road. Like in yoga would call that a samskara, right? You do a pattern so many times, it's almost etched in stone. We have to create a new pathway there. And I don't have to fall down that old pathway. Where do I want to go next? So, and then redirecting. And I think that's where either a visualization is really good. If you can't really get out of the situation, can you visualize a safe place? Or can I walk away and do something different to totally interrupt that cognitive pattern that I'm stuck in?
Okay, so visualizations, self-talk, different types of pattern interruptions. Are there other types of pattern interruptions that you employ as well?
Yeah, for myself, I love breathwork. So having my yoga background, I think that breath work is probably, I know everyone likes like biohacks, right? Like I think breath work is probably one of our biggest hacks for the nervous system. You can take someone who's completely in fight or flight mode, sympathetic reaction, and through breath work and grounding, you can move yourself right over into parasympathetic. So I think that breath work is so wonderful because you can use it both ways, right? And Babette Rothschild has this awesome chart about the polyvagal states. It's not black and white. It's not like, okay, I'm either in fight or flight or I'm in rest and digest. Like there's a whole gray area in the middle. And sometimes we need more activation, not less. So with breath work, I could do a really calming alternate nostril breath from the yoga lineage and really calm myself down and cool things off. Or I could do breath of fire and really activate myself and bring some energy and bring some awareness into, if my problem that day is feeling fatigued and getting into that thought loop, maybe that activating breath helps. But if my problem that day is I'm feeling really anxious because of this trigger, maybe alternate nostril breathing is going to bring me down to where I need to be. So that's one of my favorite ones. I know it's not talked about in DNRS, but that's where I used my yoga background. And I'm like, dude, breath work is like the quickest way to do this, sometimes quicker than a visualization. If we're in our physical activation, and when they talk about like dorsal vagal shutdown response versus like, are we in a place that we can form connection with polyvagal theory? If we're really shut down, we can't access the part of our brain that does a visualization. That's where I think some people feel like the visualizations don't work for them. I think they're just not in a place where they can access that part of their brain. But using breath work can kind of get you there.
I 100% agree with that. People will often ask me, well, where do I start? What can I do to calm down my reactions? And I thought, especially for me in the beginning of starting all this, doing the deep diaphragm breathing could sometimes take me from 100 down to like being completely functional within 10 minutes, like getting into the gut health component, because I think mostly everybody that I talk to with the limbic system injury seems to be really focused on the gut health component, and just how that's involved with all this. Can you explain that a little bit? Have you looked into how having a limbic system injury is so involved with having poor gut health?
Yeah, I mean, so we have the enteric nervous system, right? So there's an entire ability of our nervous system to be linked with our gut. The vagus nerve starts in our brain, goes down through our throat, and ends up in our gut, in our intestines. Like there's this huge link between the gut and the brain. 80%, I think now they're up to 80%. They used to say 70, but 80% of our serotonin is generated from our gut. And that's a brain, what we consider a brain neurotransmitter responsible for happiness and success. So there has to be a component there. And I've seen a lot with my clients, especially people with long-term eating disorders, with long-term illness. There's a huge shift when you're nourishing your body versus when you're not, when you're getting nutrients from your food versus when you're not. But I also think the cool thing about doing the limbic system work is chasing the gut health as its own thing with endless tests for SIBO and H. pylori and all of these. Like, how many functional medicine doctors have you gone to that were like, we're going to do this stool test and it costs $800 and you have SIBO? Of course you have SIBO. Like everyone has SIBO. It depends.
Yeah.
I think there's probably some people that have SIBO, diagnostically, but their limbic system isn't impaired. So they're not developing the outward symptoms,
The
right?
crazy symptoms. Exactly. Yeah.
I think, and I also am a firm believer that I think dietary changes and shifts are really useful and helpful, but not the same thing works for everyone. So I think that's kind of a journey people go on. And we also want to be careful if we're too restrictive and now our body kind of thinks we have to be restrictive to be healthy. Now our limbic system is always looking out for, you ate something that wasn't on the food list. Now you're going to get sick. And we go back down that same rabbit hole again. So I think the gut health is important, but I think the limbic system health, when we start to address just the fear, the anxiety, the trauma response, the sense of not feeling safe in the world, then our gut health cannot be healthy unless that is healthy.
Right. So the rest and digest for my term is not just hyperbole. It actually matters, right?
Yeah. in the wild, right? The mechanism of fight or flight in the wild, if you're a zebra and you get chased by a lion, you either run away or fight back. So you dispel the adrenaline. It doesn't build up as cortisol. You don't end up with chronic health issues like an ulcer, or you get eaten and then it doesn't matter, right? But it's only in humans. We're the only species alive that we're faced with situations every day that activate our fight or flight response. And we have to either freeze or fawn. And the adrenaline has nowhere to go, and it converts to cortisol and it builds up and it causes inflammation and chronic health issues. So the book, it's very scientific, which I love because it gives the real science to it. But I hope I didn't like overgeneralize, but that's basically the premise of the book is animals in the wild don't have chronic stress related health concerns. So how do we dispel that adrenaline? How do we face these situations? And I think that's where people that work out have a little advantage, is even if you're at a job all day where you have these adrenaline dumps, but then you go after work to the gym and you dispel that adrenaline, or you do breath work. Breath work can dispel adrenaline, and you get it out of your system and you're using your body the way it's supposed to, the way we're made, instead of letting it build up in cortisol. And now I'm at home and I'm watching Criminal Minds and my adrenaline's building up and it's like, okay, time for bed, right? Like none of this is healthy for our limbic system. So
are you still doing daily exercises with this? Is this something you employ in your life like on a daily basis? And what are you doing now for that?
yeah, so I found that I don't have to be as strict as I was before. I know with DNRS in particular, they say, an hour a day, you have to do these really strict visualizations, and you have to sit there and talk to yourself. I'm at a point now in my healing journey where I'm not having to do a lot of that. I think I've gotten to a point where I have a lot of routines that are just naturally telling me that I'm healed, or that are naturally reminding me that these outside triggers don't have to affect me in that way. But there's times where if I know I'm going to go into like Home Depot, and those smells used to really trigger me when I was sick, before I walk in, I'll be like, you know what? You're healthy. Stop overreacting. I'm safe. This isn't going to trigger me. And I'll do that. I'll do a quick version of what DNRS would have been. And I'll do some deep breathing. And then I'll go in and it doesn't trigger me. So I think when you finally get to that point that your limbic system is hanging out in a safe space, you don't find yourself having to be as regimented with it. But I've also been able to get back into hiking and running and sitting outside in nature and gardening. So I think those things are a very protective buffer for me. So it helps that I don't have to fall back into doing as much of the self-talk and visualizations because I'm living it, right? That's the point. When you start brain retraining, some people are bedbound. So they're living their life through those visualizations of like, someday I'll be outside again. Someday I'll be running again. When you start being able to get your life back, you're living those things every day. The visualizations don't become as huge for that.
Do you think there's something to be said about like faking until you make it kind of thing? Is that
100%.
yeah, okay.
And I say that all the time as a therapist with depression, right? When we think about CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, behavior activation is the core component of that. And really what behavior activation is fake it till you make it. Like if you feel depressed and all you say all day is I'm depressed, so I can't do anything and my life's meaningless, like that doesn't work. You have to put your schedule there and start doing the things. When you start doing the things, you feel more motivated, you feel more accomplished. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. And even clients of mine that go into a day program or the hospital, the meds might be a small part of that, but it's the structure. It's someone who's been laying in bed crying all day for months versus you go to a hospital or a treatment program and they make you get up and they make you eat breakfast and they make you go to group and they make you go to yoga.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it is that behavior activation piece? So
I know. And when they do go these things, a lot of people will say to me, even if they just add a little bit of joy to their lives again, right? They just go on a trip where they hang out with a friend. They're like, wow, for that like one night I was hanging out with my friends, I felt better, and I'm like, that's limbic system injury, and they're kind of like, what's that? What are you talking about? And they look at me like I'm some kind of weirdo, but it's not a coincidence. It's not didn't just happen by some magical force that you start feeling better when that happened, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a great book too. And I brought it out next to me because I was like, I want to mention it, but it's the polyvagal flip chart. Deb Dana talks all about polyvagal stuff. And we talk about parasympathetic and sympathetic, but then there's ventral vagal. Ventral vagal is what allows you to feel a sense of connection and safety. So her biggest thing, and I'll show you, just like there's like a great flip chart. I use it with my clients all the time. So I always have this next to my desk, which might not be for normal people, but whatever. But when she talks about, we don't want to be black and white with your either fight or flight, rest and digest, there's nothing else. Ventral vagal is what's in the middle of that. So you're just relaxed enough that you feel safe to interact with people. And that as humans, what sets us apart from just having fight or flight or rest is we have ability to connect and to feel safety. And that when we co-regulate with other people, that's the only place you can really heal. And that's where like therapy comes in. And that's where having, like you said, instead of isolating because you're sick, going out with a friend, doing a vacation, it's ventral vagal connection.
I know for myself, now I really think that there could be so much purpose behind suffering. And I mean, you've been there, you've been sick yourself, so you understand that. And I think it could be such an endless soul-sucking pit if you just think that this is all for nothing, and you're just, oh, woe is me, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and nothing good's going to come out of it, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
And I know it's so hard when you're in that state to think like that. But so coming out of this, so how long did it take you before you really started to see some results? Where are you now in your health? And how did you bring about purpose from this? I'm asking a lot of questions in one.
I love it. I love it.
Take as long as you need to answer.
Well, I want to start with the purpose question. That's such a good question. And I find myself, as a therapist, I've kind of specialized in helping people with chronic pain, chronic illness because of my experiences. And I use a modality called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the first things that we do in that modality is we ask someone to make a values compass or a little chart, like almost like a pie chart of like, where do you find your purpose? What percentage of your life is tied up in your identity with your family, with community service, with work, with health, right? And sometimes it's surprising how much of our mentality or our values feel like it has to be tied up in some of these negative things versus opening up space to focus on giving back to your community, having a faith or spiritual practice, time with your family and friends. So that sense of purpose, I think, is huge. And I think if we don't have that, it's really hard to find other healing. And acceptance and commitment therapy talks about accepting where you're at. And even if nothing changes in your symptoms, in your circumstances, even if nothing changes, can you still commit to living with purpose and following your values? And I like, if you start there, if you start with like, if nothing changes, I can still work on looking after these other things that are meaningful. That's where I think we need to start. Because then it opens up possibility. Of course, you're going to feel better if you start to live a values-driven life, but we don't have to start with, I can't live that way until I feel better. We have to flip it, right? If I start living as if these things matter to me, I'm going to start to feel better. So I always like to put that out there because it's not my idea. It's from a really old modality, but it's so limbic system based too. Sense of safety and purpose. But I think you were asking too about like where my journey was. So, I had struggled with, now that we know kind of the Epstein-Barr journey, I've probably struggled with that since 2005. I think I had mono for the first time. So it's been a long journey of not feeling good. We'll just say that. And then Lyme disease, who knows? I mean, all of these things were misdiagnosed for so long. So I was sick for a while and up and down, right? But started doing DNRS in fall of 2020 and noticed just shifts with the energy, with the possibility of healing, with feeling like if I could visualize having fun with my daughter or going on a run with my husband or hiking with the dogs, then it motivated more of wanting to try those things. And so the first thing I just noticed was this shift in motivation and hope that something could work. So then I started being able to engage in more of those things. And I'll say that, again, one of the biggest changes for me with DNRS and just limbic system, limbic healing, all of those things was so much of that histamine mold allergy response to things. I can just enjoy so many things. I can go into a store now with like the air fresheners that would have sent me into like asthma allergy world before. I can go out and be in the world and smell things and be around triggers and stressors. I don't even have seasonal allergies anymore. Whatever that was with the histamine response, the MCAS response, the brain retraining almost eliminated that, which was amazing. The fatigue, the pain. I mean, I had a spinal fracture in 2017. Like some of that I know isn't magically going to go away by talking to myself and and doing my training as much as I want it to. Like I work out of my bed a lot of days because I have a spinal injury that doesn't all heal. However, when I have a day with some pain and I think, you know what, we can manage this pain. What else could I do today? Can I still meditate? Can I still breathe? Can I still go sit outside, even if I'm not in the garden? Once I'm out there, I feel better. And I think that's limbic system too. And then I think that allows me to go on the hike later or to dig around in the garden with my back brace on, because we're not getting caught in that victim mentality of, oh, I woke up, my back hurts. I better stay in bed all day and take pain meds and watch TV and think horrible thoughts about myself and think I'll never get better. And now I'm in bed for a week. That's where I think so many people get caught up in when we've had these issues for so long. So it seems subtle, but when you start to implement it snowballs.
Absolutely. So you do your own coaching with this. Where can we find you? What can we do? How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my channel, I'm sure you can put a link to my channel in there. It's Happy and Free Healing. That's the name of my business as well. And I am working on a program. I'm working on my own program. I don't want to directly compete with anyone, but I think what's different, because we all have such different gifts to offer the world, right? And so I think what's different about mine is probably so different from what you're going to offer. They can probably complement each other so well. My program is going to be called Psyche, Soma, Soul. And so it's about, the mind, body, spirit, nature connection. And so I'm really focusing in on what I think is lacking in the more cognitive-based programs, which is spirituality, nature. I'm a yoga teacher, I'm an herbalist, I'm a hippie, right? Like, let's just be honest. Like I'm the crazy hippie in the long dress that sells my herbs at the market and tells my clients about their trauma. And like, I sit out in the sunshine and I walk in my bare feet. That's what I think I can kind of bring in and help people connect with from this limbic system healing side of things. So, I can provide you links to those kind of things that I do with breathwork and yoga and that program that I'm going to be launching really soon. But yeah, I would love to collaborate more with what you're doing as well, because I think the more we all bring in, I don't think it's a competition space. I think it's a collaboration space. And I think, I would love to take any course someone's offering, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that part of it. I don't have that background. Please tell me your knowledge. And I just eat it up,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you're absolutely brilliant, and you're just going on your challenge, doing the exercises, and the way you explain them is just so easy for everybody to understand that I highly recommend everybody check that out. And we live in Florida, so we should get together for a steak sometime.
We need to make like a limbic system retreat in Florida. Like, what
We
a place,
should.
right?
Yeah, that would be great. All right. Thank you so much, Teresa. I want to link all of her information down below. You guys need to check out her channel, subscribe to it. Everybody, please subscribe to it. I'm begging you. You need to do this for your own health. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.